what goes on in primary school through my conversations with different people. Each guest will have the same 3 questions. What are the key things we need to know about the topic? What does that look like for students? And what might parents notice? Tune in each week, the link from the e-brief, and let the learning begin. I am so excited this week to have Haidee Betts as my guest. And Haidee's going to continue our conversation on agency and looking in particular at ownership. So as with all the guests, it's the same 3 questions. So question 1, Haidee, and welcome. Do you want to just actually, before we go into question 1, tell us a little bit about how you came to be at UWC or how long you've been here?
Great. Hi, it's great to be here for the podcast. I've been at UWC now 13 years, coming originally from New Zealand. So I've been both at the Anguakiru campus and now at this campus.
Wow, I think you may be older than the campus, though you look very young,
Thank
I have
you.
to say. So over to our first question. What are the key areas that we need to know about agency, in particular ownership?
Okay, so when thinking about ownership, learners are really involved in designing their own pathway. Their voice matters, so they can influence the direction of their learning. They play a part really in the decisions that are made when they're creating the class, when we're thinking about organising our space, and the way that we really function as a collective group. And what matters also to them, whether they want to collaborate, whether they want to work independently, what that day might look like for them. And so really it's about, if we think it in a nutshell, it's about learners being able to set their own goals, initiate conferences with teachers, and also make time with other students. They can seek clarification or feedback or recommendations for their next steps. And really they have a sense of autonomy in their learning. So their thoughts and passions and interests are valued. And also they're really involved in making connections between what our learning goals are and their personal interests.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. I only wish it was like that when I was at school. It's a far better way of learning, I think. So you mentioned there a little bit about the students. So what does this look like for students?
Yeah, well, in an everyday classroom setting, it could look like ownership over when they're approaching their learning tasks in the day, whether they prefer to work collaboratively or independently on a certain task. That kind of negotiation or conversation happens regularly. How they plan to represent their learning. And also an awareness of their choices, because there's a responsibility in ownership as well. What do I need to do to utilise my time well? And how can we build on our own learning? And so a real sense of involvement and influence in their learning journey. And if we look at, say, an inquiry, after we've built the foundation, the knowledge and foundation that they need to understand the inquiry, it's about deciding on which questions they want to use to research whatever the topic is, deciding about how they'll go about that, what the product might be. Is it a project that requires modelling? Does it require an iMovie? Is there interviews involved? Is there a presentation? And so there's ownership over what we want to do and how we want to do it. And really also, what action can we take at the end of that? Can I make an impact around the school? Can I have a change in the way we do things within the classroom?
It sounds actually to me, it reminds me very much of the 100 languages actually in our infant school, because sometimes people do say that's just our older children who are able to cope with having more ownership of their learning, when really our very youngest children are very adept at doing that too. So thank you, that's really interesting. So if I'm a parent listening to this and I think, well, that sounds very different to when I was at school, what might a parent notice in their child? What might they notice if their child's having more ownership?
Well, I think you'll notice certain things. For example, in conversations, you might hear your child talking about their learning experiences with that sense of joy and choice that comes from owning something that you're a part of, and also being able to articulate their choices. They might be able to plan and make decisions about how we might solve problems. You'd see that not only when they're talking about school, but also challenges that might happen at home. If there is a problem that we're dealing with, what are some strategies that we can use? How can we plan ahead for this? What are some approaches that we could come at this with? So it's really an ownership of saying, I'm a part of this journey and I have influence or impact over this journey. And so at home and at school, those things will look quite similar. But really being willing to share their options and thinking about possible solutions, knowing that they're a part of that.
It's amazing, and I was speaking to some children actually from grade 5 very recently, and they articulated that really well. And what was most impressive for me was the fact that they did actually speak really well about having that responsibility, and we don't take the easy choices, and I may want to work with my friend on something, but actually that's not what I need to be doing at the moment. I need to go and do such and such. And the real sense of purpose about what they had to do, and it was down to them. They really needed to own that. So it's great to actually see it in action with the children.
And I think one of the parts of the journey is as you start to make decisions, you look back and reflect. And so many of the students now are able to make choices in a way that they wouldn't have perhaps at the beginning, because they realise what works best for them at certain times and the right way to approach a challenge.
So that must be interesting for you as the teacher to see how they've developed in being able to take ownership of their own learning.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see, just even as you say, how they can articulate that now. And it comes into the next point of learning that they're involved in, because they'll consider the choices that they made previously and what they might apply to this new learning adventure, which is great for us now in exhibition.
Oh,
because
wow.
Everything's in place.
That's when ownership will come to the fore more than anywhere. So thank you so much for joining us this week. It's really, really interesting. And next week, actually, we have another guest who'll continue the conversation around agency, looking at the child as an expert. So even more interesting, again, moving on. So thanks very much. Tune in next week for the next Patter with Pauline podcast. The same time, same place.